This is the Cereal at Midnight podcast, episode 3. Hello and welcome to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland and I am your host for this and every episode of this podcast. Thanks to everyone who has downloaded, who has subscribed to this podcast. It's always tricky when a new podcast enters the scene, and the feedback for the first 2 episodes of this show has been even better than I expected. I hoped that the YouTube audience would connect with the podcast, but so far, my highest expectations have been passed. You guys have really you've connected with the show. Please continue to subscribe, to leave reviews, to engage. If you're watching this on YouTube, the old thumbs up is it's a nice thing to do. And subscribe, leave a comment so that I know you're watching. Those help the show. This is the official podcast of CerealAtMidnite.com. There's always new things happening at CerealAtMidnite.com. This week alone, I'm running a 3-part interview with Jan Sternad, the man who, you guys know the Sword of the Atom comic book miniseries. That's Jan Sternad. He wrote Star Wars during the dark times for Dark Horse before the Disney purchase of Star Wars as a franchise. Some of the earliest Jedi stories from the episode 2 era come from Jan Sternad, and he worked at Disney Animation for years. The shows that I love so much that I grew up with, Darkwing Duck. I'll forget some of them if I start naming them. He worked on many of the shows that we love from the 90s and beyond. And he was a real treat. It's so funny because in the interview, basically I ask one question and then I got like 3 pages of a reply back. And so it's a 3-part interview, and it's essentially just me asking 3 different questions, and then he just runs with it, and it's fantastic. So that is a text interview, and it is only at CerealAtMidnite.com. I'll put links in the description of this video. It's CerealAtMidnite.com. That's all you need to know. For this episode, for the 3rd installment of this podcast, we're talking to somebody truly special. I sat down with Francesco Simeoni, he was with Arrow Video for 12 years. He was the director of catalog distribution for the better part of 6 years, and then another almost 6 years as the director of content. He left the company a little while ago to start his own label, Radiance Films. So this is a really interesting and unique opportunity because we're talking to someone who is at the very beginning. He's not at the very beginning of the process, but he's about to launch Radiance Films. He's pretty much, you can pre-order the movies now. He's even got a package where you can order like the first 3 years worth of titles from Radiance. But we're getting a glimpse through this conversation into the beginning of this journey. You know, someone's launching a new label in this marketplace. So, I asked all the questions. I asked about 4K. I asked about what kind of movies, what kind of movies are you going to release? What are you focusing on, a specific genre? We got, I'm very interested in the business aspect of these things. So we talked a lot about the infrastructure and what's required. I talked about the extras, like producing new special features. I talked about some of the movies that I think need more of a spotlight than they're getting. And hopefully I left no stone unturned here. It was he was really open and honest with his answers. So, you know what? Let's roll right into it. Without further ado, Francesco Simeoni from Radiance Films. It's great to talk to you. I've been an admirer for a long time, and I've certainly, the stuff that was, you were at Arrow 12 years, right? I think it was 12 years.
Yeah.
And now a huge transition. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It was a long time at Arrow. I think that's a long time for any job. It's the longest than I've been in any job. And now it's a bit surreal, kind of doing a lot of the stuff that I used to do at Arrow. Certainly when I started out, when I started at Arrow, it was, just kind of me, the owner of the company, his aunt, and like a part-time accountant. So I just kind of came in and I was like, right, okay, so we've got this cult label that's kind of the makings of something, and then I just had to basically build upon that because when it started, it was an idea that hadn't really fully taken shape. It was Masters of Jallo was on one release, and then another one was just like plain, and then another one had a tagline, and it was Lucio Fulci films and Caligula, and what else had come out at that point? Not a lot. When I started, it'd been going about a year, but only had a few releases out. So I came in and I was kind of like, okay, well, don't just be a horror label, because you're going to be scraping the barrel in a few years' time when you run out of good movies, because you at that time, boutiques didn't get, big studio hot property titles. So I saw the company had Battle Royale come in. I was like, this is absolutely what the label should be. It should be about, all-encompassing cult films and genre movies, and blaxploitation and thrillers, and Brian De Palma movies. That was one of my first big things. Was like, right, let's get all the De Palma movies. So that's kind of what I did, and in a funny sort of way, I'm back there again with those kind of ideas of like, what can I do now? Where do I go, and what do I shine a light on? So it's really interesting, and it's fun. It's nice to kind of go digging away in things and find treasure, basically.
Well, I want to talk to you about Radiance. I want to talk to you about what the need is in the market, like finding your niche with a new label. But to do that, I also want you to kind of tell me what your perception is. You've been there for basically the birth and the heyday of what we now call the boutique market. And, we saw it kind of leave retail and become this giant on a different level. And you're one of the major players in that. Could you talk to me just a little bit about, I don't know, finding that model, exploring it, how it's grown? Is it still a growing model? Is it changing into something else? The collector aspect of so much of what we're talking about. I'd really love your opinion on just how the market's changed over the last 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has changed so much over that time. I mean, when I started, Blu-ray just taken off. It was 2010. Been going a few years. Probably the first Blu-rays 2006, 2007. Yeah. But that time it was a Blu-ray a year from every other label, if they even got in it. Arrow had done one or two, maybe. So Blu-ray wasn't really a big thing. Everyone was still releasing DVDs. DVDs would sell really well, which is a mad thought now. And you could release an independent movie and do really well with it. This is a time where labels like Arrow and the labels that were popular at that time didn't really deal with studios in anything like the way they do now. The idea back then that an independent label would do a major Hollywood top title, there's like charts that we have in the UK and the US. It's like if you're in the top 200 sellers, if you asked a big studio back then, they would have just laughed at you and thought you're absolutely crazy. So that really is the dynamic shift, that studios then got to a point where they said, yeah, okay, fine, we'll let you have this, and we'll just take a percentage, because we can't be, it's not can't be bothered. It's, the economics don't work for us anymore. And that's what happened with studios. But in a really interesting way, that's kind of going back again now. We're seeing Paramount putting out more catalog titles and doing their own special editions. Every now and again you'll see, a big title coming out from a studio, which is done in the same way the boutiques do. Like there was an award show in the UK the other day, and Universal won big for their release of Inglourious Bastards. That was a release that looked a bit like a boutique label release. So it's really interesting that we've got this landscape now where everyone's trying to do this. They're all kind of looking at it and seeing, okay, well, if you print stuff off and you put it in the box and you call it a collector's edition, people will buy it. And that's kind of what's happening. I think some people are okay with that. Maybe other people are just a bit like, you can't just put stuff in and expect me to pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
I think there is a really discerning customer out there that will sort of look at it and go, yeah, I'll wait for a sale on that. And, you know, they see the difference between the boutiques and the amount of work and care, I think, that goes into the releases. And I think that ultimately is the difference. And in terms of the market as a whole, I think we're just in the same business as vinyl or other niche businesses. You know, I think this, you know, limited edition model is spreading across all industries now, you know, where you've got limited edition clothes and limited edition everything now. And I think that is just a reaction to the market in terms of the way things are sold, the way they're stored. And I just think that's a reality we're in now.
Do you think limited editions are a good way to, you know, I hear so much of the criticism. I hear everything, right? I get everybody coming at me from all sides, giving me their opinions about things. And some of them love the limited editions. There's value built in, you know, there's, you know, like, you know, equity built into a purchase that's a limited edition. But then there's at the same time, there are people who are kind of suspicious of it. And they're like, well, I want that booklet, or I want that slipcover, or whatever it is. It's an interesting divide, I guess, in the collecting community. Limited editions are kind of a necessary evil, right? Or I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth and even say that they're evil, but those tactics, it's kind of necessary at this point, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary in that it's just not economical to do it any other way. I mean, unless you're a big company and you can afford to be sat on lots of stock that you might not sell, or that you will just have to leave until people do buy it. And that's a big risk for small companies. And the thing is that market pressures do put labels in such a place that if they spend a lot of money manufacturing a box, a poster, a booklet, etc., and then you've got studios saying, hey, buy this 4K release, it's $14.99. And the independent labels there going, oh my God, I spent all this money. And now I've got my buyers going, hey, I'm going to get this 4K. And yours is double that price and it's not 4K, or it doesn't have this, or it doesn't have that. So then the label says, well, I've got to meet market demand by putting my stuff on sale, but my margin is now so squeezed because I spent all that on expensive packaging, which in contrast, the studio's doing, you know, tens of thousands of units maybe, where they have a deal where their manufacturing cost is very, very cheap, but the labels is probably not very cheap. So that's the difference. So that's where the limited edition model comes in and saves the label that squeeze, allows them to survive. And that's basically what it's about. I don't think any label was doing it to hoodwink people and to sort of, you know, sucker them into paying more money for stuff. I mean, you know, as I said, maybe some of the studios just sort of, perhaps just because of the way they're set up, because they're big organizations, just to have an approach where it is just like, you know, just print this thing off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always feel so carefully curated, I'd say, is my personal view on things. So that's the way I see it, really.
It seems like there's a lot of, I think some fans see it and some don't, but there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in the Blu-ray market. And that leads us directly into the creation of Radiance Films. This is your baby, am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I never really saw myself as a curator or anything like that, really. At Arrow, Arrow was always just an employee, kind of carrying out the wishes of fan feedback, the team, you know, company aims. So I just kind of saw myself as a kind of conduit to all those things. And I think I kind of, you know, was put in a position where I was like going to start Radiance. And I thought, well, what do I do? It's all on me. I haven't got all of those things to say, well, you know, it's for them and it's for that. And it's because I need to, I really had to own it. And I had to sort of make my peace with calling myself a curator, essentially. And that is a bit weird, because I think a big onus is placed on that in terms of how important it is. And for me, it's not like it's not like I think about it so deeply. I'm just doing films I like, which, it doesn't have that kind of weight of importance because I'm just doing what I like. So it doesn't feel,
Yeah.
that heavy, if you know what I mean. So I had to do that and kind of think about what that meant in terms of how I selected releases and what the label looked like and what it did and all that kind of thing. So that's been an interesting process. I mean, you hear a lot of people talking about like imposter syndrome and stuff like that, and that's it's so easy to have that in this job where I'm not an expert in anything. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. The experts are the people that I work with. When I need the best encoding for a Blu-ray, I go to the best encoder. When I need someone to do a commentary because they're the expert in the film. So I've always got all these people who are way better than me telling me stuff. So it's very easy to sort of be sat where I am and just sort of think, oh, just do what I can.
But that's what's exciting about it, because you have so much experience and you have so many connections and you are drawing from the best. And the first, the entry titles, the launch titles, it's a diverse bunch of stuff. So the tagline, when you go to radiancefilms.co.uk, it says classic, cult, and art house films. Is that kind of a broad description of kind of what you're going for here?
I just come back to sort of saying it's films that I like, really. I mean, I'm not the kind of person. When I started at Arrow, I felt like such an outsider because I'd seen a couple of Argento films, never seen any Fulci films, and I actually was made to feel a bit like an outsider because I was quite young. I was 26 when I started. I'd spent all that time until then kind of going through the classics, essentially, the canon, the AFI list, the Sight and Sound list, this, the that list, which didn't have Fulci films on, basically. So I did kind of start at Arrow a bit green, and when I did that and started to see more things that I was aware of but hadn't maybe gotten fully into, I basically sort of realized how much I do like cult films. And when I left Arrow, that was even more pronounced because I sort of left and I thought, well, what do I want to do? And there was a bit of overlap, but I was sort of conscious not to sort of do too similar. So there are some things that maybe I won't do so much. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it was my kind of personality. I'm not a slasher fan, really, so don't expect any slashers from me. But cult films definitely are a big thing. Art house films, I'm very passionate about. I like a bit of everything, really. Is the simplest answer, and that's probably what's going to be in the label. And the reason for the diverse slate was that I wanted to go out and people to look at it and go, oh, okay, so it's going to be a bit of everything, basically. I didn't want to go out with two titles and people look at those and go, oh, okay, so it's going to be all like this, and then a crime film comes in and it's like, oh, okay, they're doing crime films too, and it's always something new and a surprise. I think people do kind of look at things and it's easy to make an assumption based on that. So I wanted to go out and go, yes, it's broad.
Where did the name come from?
The name was so unbelievably hard to come up with. I had a big piece of paper and I wrote down like some sort of key like tenets of what I wanted the label to stand for. And then I sort of drew a circle and lines off for other words for those words, and then more words for those words. And I, like a complete madman, I'd written all these words down, and I was like, yeah, none of them feel right. And at the time, I was reading this book on Italian cinema, and it's the history going right back to when it started, and it was in all the different cities. So it's like every city had an industry unto itself. So I was reading about that and all those companies, and I was like, oh, these are what cool names, like Lux and Smeralda and stuff like that. And all of them had been taken. There was always a company for one of those names. But in describing it, it said the radiance of these companies. So I was like, oh, radiance, that's quite cool. Like radiance, light from the screen and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, that sounds good, and it stuck from there.
I love it. It's good. It says it conjures up, what's what you said, that it's not a specific thing either. It leaves you room to kind of explore and play around with different things.
Yeah.
What can people expect from these releases? People who know Arrow stuff expect a certain package. They're expecting, a certain amount of commentaries and features and things like that. Are you looking to load these up with a lot of bonuses?
Yeah, I mean, my rule of thumb really is explore all the things that are worth exploring, and leave it there. I mean, I think you see a lot of releases now where it's like you get predictable extras. Let's say you sort of get a commentary. I'm not a massive commentary fan, and I think that's often because of time, really, not for the format. It's just time. If every release comes with a commentary, for myself, I just wouldn't get to them. So for my own view on that, I'm being selective for the same reason, because I kind of think not everyone can. If I release, however many titles, they all have commentaries. How many of them will be listened to? I think not all films really need commentaries. So I'm playing around with that as a format as well. So on Red Sun, although that has a full commentary, from the files we received, we cut it down because a lot of what goes into some commentaries, not all, but that one especially, can be best described as, just talking about what's on screen, and it's just a bit like you're sitting there waiting to get to the good bits. So we cut it down and we basically chaptered it, and we've described it. So you can go to the menu and you can be like, oh, okay, so there's a thing on the director's favorite scene. Oh, I'll just listen to that. Or there's a thing on the end, or you can go back and listen to it all. So I thought that was really good, because I think some people might just be like, I just want to dip in and out, or I want to listen to the whole thing, or I might do it in a few chunks. So I like that as an option, which I haven't really seen anyone do before.
Yeah.
So I want to do stuff like that, but more traditionally, in terms of cast and crew interviews, where they're available, or can be, organized. Not everybody necessarily wants to talk on camera. I think this is always this thing when specs go out and people are like, oh, shame they didn't get an interview with this person, like we didn't ask.
Right.
Some people just don't want to talk about the film, or just won't answer, or many other
or
reasons.
If they do, they want $25,000 or something like
that. That can happen as well. But I often find that experts on the subject are just as, if not more, illuminating about the film. So I'm really keen on having experts from the country. So we've been shooting a few interviews lately with Italian authors and critics about some of the Italian films we've got, which has been great, because you're literally getting the person who wrote the book on the subject, who has the cultural knowledge of the film and what was happening historically and culturally. So the interviews are really interesting. But equally, there's great people that I've worked with over my years at Arrow, who are doing like visual essays and sometimes commentaries and stuff like that, and just plain interviews. So it's a real nice mix. I think it sort of ticks those kind of three distinct areas, I think, where you've got like specialist, cast and crew, and then critics that we all love to kind of hear from, basically. So that's the mix that people can expect over pretty much all the releases.
You brought up visual essays, and I want to get your thoughts on something, because you're being very honest and open, and there's been a real rise of visual essays, and I feel like there's a decline of actual essays, like printed material essays. They're still around, but I feel like we're watching a transition happen. I like packaged materials where I can, take it with me and read in those 80-page books that I can read in bed. Do you have an opinion on the changing of that, or if there even is a change in there, if it's just my perception on that? Are we losing printed essays to visual essays?
I mean, I suppose it would depend on the label, really. I mean, I think there's still lots of good essays out there. My own releases that we have so far, again, you know, it's the same approach as I described earlier. If it's there, we'll do it. So we just nearly finished the booklet on Big Time Gambling Boss, and that's got 2 essays. So that's 4,000 words. That's maybe a 20-minute read, something like that. So that covers off the film, that covers off the director, and it covers off the cast in the booklet. And the disc covers off the genre and the film. So if you read everything, you should have no overlap. And there was not really much more to do. You know, we couldn't dream up another extra because we discussed everything. We couldn't put any more in the booklet because we literally tried to find all we could in terms of like archival stuff, etc. So that's the approach. Whereas like The Working Class Goes to Heaven, we've got interviews with 3 of the cast and crew. We've got a piece from Alex Cox, giving an appreciation on the film. We've got a visual essay on Elio Petri and his politics, which is really fascinating, goes throughout his career. We've got a documentary on the making of the film, which goes into the sort of the real life location, the factory they filmed in, all the people, the politics of the town and everything that was going on, all the background for that. So you've got all of that, you've got quite a lot covered off. And then you've got the booklet, which deals with the film itself from a specifically Italian viewpoint, Italian history and stuff that's not covered on the disc. And then you've got another essay about Petri and Volonte's collaborations, which is really interesting. And then you've got an interview with Petri, which doesn't overlap with the disc either. And then you've got 2 archival essays. So that booklet's massive, but it doesn't overlap the disc. So that's what I'm really careful to do with everything that's done on a release, is that you don't sort of look at it and go, oh, I just read that, or I just heard that, or you know. So, and that can be quite tough. With a film like A Woman Kills, that might happen because there's nothing about that film. No one knows anything about it. So, you know, that's the thing. It's covering off everything that you can about the release whilst not, well, just boring people basically. But doing right by it, like you say, like people want to have a booklet. I think people want to have a booklet and have a good, you know, leaf through and, you know, have a potentially, you know, an hour or more's entertainment, I suppose.
Yeah, I want to learn about it, you know. And I think we're wired to process information differently. If we read something, I don't know if it's like it sticks with you better, but I don't know. I'm glad to hear this. You're saying all the right things to me. This is exciting to hear. So let's talk about some of the movies themselves. We don't necessarily have to go down the list. I do have the list here, but do you want to talk a little bit about some of the movies that are coming in the first launch titles and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I've talked about all of them so much. I sort of almost wish I'd announced more titles to have something new to talk about. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because with the slate, I was kind of able to delve into different areas. So I think Working Class Goes to Heaven. I mean, for me, it's, you know, films of the 60s and 70s as a whole, I'm a big fan of. You know, I just think it was such an amazing era for filmmaking. But Working Class Goes to Heaven is a really interesting one because, I mean, it's got this great performance at the heart of it from Gian Maria Volonte, who's just one of the absolute greats. But also, which I've definitely appreciated a lot more since working on the release. And it looking so good as well. So I mean, some people might have seen the DVD, but you know, this really blows it out of the water. I mean, it's a lovely new restoration. We were able to do some extra color grading on the release to correct some previous issues because we were very fortunate to get access to a video master taken from a print, which we got and then compared and then realized some scenes had been sort of very flatly graded. This is a bit of a problem, you know, from some countries where there aren't massive budgets, they just kind of knock things out and it's all quite automated. So we were able to correct that. It looks really good now. But Working Class Goes to Heaven has this lineage to Italian comedies, basically, commedia all'italiana, which was something that sort of sprung up in the late 50s. I mean, I think Big Deal of Madonna Street is probably the first one where I think some of these films might have been a bit, what's the best way of putting this? I mean, maybe they sort of discounted a bit by people as like, oh, you know, just like silly entertainment. But the films themselves are all sort of quite political in their way. They're really critical of social attitudes at the time, or things that were happening. I mean, even the historical ones, which there's a great one called The Great War, which was critical about that as well. So there is a lineage to that as well. But the films themselves were sort of massively entertaining, often with great stars in like Mastroianni and stuff like that. So the way that this harks back to that genre is really interesting as well. That I think Working Class Goes to Heaven sort of looked like quite a heavy political film, but actually is like quite a, in a way, sort of a bombastic, you know, farce almost, in that, you know, his character is this guy who's motivated by sex, but he can't perform because he's drained by the work and so on. So all this stuff's going on that just gives the film a great layer to appreciate, I think.
As you're talking about this, you've reminded me of something that I've been talking about for a while, and I want your take on it because you're directly connected to this thing. So, you know, we've seen the trends of, you know, giallo is super popular, and then I have seen spaghetti westerns finally really start to catch on and get a serious look, and there's so many of them that haven't been restored yet. But and now, surprisingly, like the peplum, like the sword and the sandal Italian genre, but there's still dozens, if not hundreds, of these like sexy spy movies or these sex comedies, or, you know, Fulci worked on some of this stuff. I mean, the people that worked on these movies is really impressive, but it's like they never left Europe, and I don't know that they ever got translated outside of Italy. Do you see any hope for some of these movies to get, you know, what you're talking about, you're helping with it, but do you see a trend where some of these are found and reassessed, or at least restored?
I mean, it's a tough question because, you know, someone else might have a different interpretation. But my gut feeling is that if you put enough into it, eventually people will respond to it. I mean, I'm hoping that, because I'm going to be doing a bit of that in terms of focusing on genres that aren't necessarily popular.
Yeah.
But, you know, like you said, there's a reason that the giallo is super popular. That's because you had loads of labels really pushing it. And now we've basically had all of the classics. You know, audiences are getting to the point where they've, you know, either ticked all their boxes, or they're getting to the point where they're sort of like, you know, let's have something new now. Yeah. So that gives me hope, but sometimes it can be difficult for people to get into something, because when you first see a very specific genre like those, can sometimes be a bit disarming. You're kind of like, what the hell is this? And I'm not sure I really get it. And you know, it can take time to adjust, or to necessarily dig out the best examples of that genre. It's not always possible to sort of say, right, okay, well, we're going to launch this new series of films and we want to get this one, and this one is by the one studio that won't do any deals. So sometimes you have to start in a different place. I mean, I had that a bit at Arrow, like, you know, we did some Iranian films that, you know, I think were very good. But a lot of people were like, no, you know, maybe they should have started with this. And it's like, well, that one wasn't available. So, but, you know, eventually I think if the films are good enough, people go for them over time. The problem is that over time doesn't always work for the label. So, you know, we'll see.
And I think for some of this stuff, I wonder if it's just in someone's basement. You know, some of these European movies or whatever they are, they may be like, where are the prints? Are they with a studio? Are they with some of this stuff's really scattered from what I understand. And it's just gone. It's just gone. Nobody knows where it is.
Yeah, I mean, that sometimes can be a real nightmare. There are various films that, I've got on my list that I would love to do,
Mhm.
but it's a situation where maybe the rights are a bit spread and you're not really sure who owns it for this territory. Like it might be available for Australia for some bizarre reason, but not available for the rest of the world, or you know exactly where the material is and who the licensor is, but they're absolutely crazy and they won't license it because they want $1 million or whatever. So there are films that are just buried. And I had a conversation with the studio, or have been on and off having a conversation for some really great classic films, and they're all blocked with music clearances.
Ah,
And maybe some of them have popped up on streaming because that's a different right, and that's okay. And people will be like, but I saw it on streaming, of course it can come out. And it's like, well, no, sometimes it's a different set of rights, and the studio would love to get it out, but the costs are just too much because no one's going to come in, and it's too small money for them to license for the whole world, because I think that's the only way they'll do it from what I can gather. And no label can do that. No label can sort of buy world rights on a really, relatively speaking, obscure film to sell, you know,
mhm.
Amazon in a few countries at best, maybe. You never make your money back.
Well, what sort of
So it's a
territories are you
shame.
gonna? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's a shame that some of these films get locked in that situation that we'd all love to see, but yeah.
Right. Well, you're based in the UK. Are you planning on with Radiance? Are we? What territories will you be planning on releasing the films in?
So I'll be releasing in the UK, the US, and Canada. So listings are up for the first few releases on Amazon.com, and should be Amazon.ca as well, and Amazon.co.uk, and then all the retailers you expect, like Diabolic DVD and Grindhouse, I think is up or coming, and so on.
This is it's I'm really excited. You know what you're doing. You've got the experience to back it up. You've got the connections to back it up, and I think that we are in store for great things. So, is there anything you want to cover that we didn't hit on?
Um, no, not really. I mean, all I'll say is that I think I'm doing things slightly differently. So I hope kind of people take the time to kind of look into that, and um, I guess kind of see it from the point we were discussing earlier, which is that I'm trying to push the boundaries as much as possible as a small company. So I'm doing things slightly differently. I did the 3-year package for 50 people in the US and 50 in the UK, and that is allowing me to basically use that pre-order money to then go out and beef up the schedule. So I'm gonna keep doing that. So I'm gonna beef up the schedule again, and then sell more packages. So they're going to be slightly different. They won't be the same ones again. And then the people who buy into those, they'll hopefully, if it all works out, they'll get the beefed up version of the thing that follows, and the packages that follow that will potentially then get beefed up again. So it's a kind of pay it forward type scheme, essentially. Scheme is the wrong word. um, but yeah, so that's what I'm doing, and hopefully that will allow me to plumb the depths of those areas of cinema, which, like you mentioned, like sexy comedies or whatever, could be something for the
Hey.
future potentially.
This is what when you have to rub your hands together when you say scheme. You have to go scheme.
Yeah, and sort of cock an eyebrow.
Yeah. I did think of something else that I need to ask you, because if we don't talk about it here, it's gonna come up. Why no 4K? You're gonna get this question a million times. Let's address it.
Yeah. It's not because of anything to do with the format or anything like that. It's just that these films are not restored in 4K, they're never going to be restored in 4K, like 4K HDR properly. I think there are releases on the market that are on the format that probably shouldn't be, or aren't done properly. I mean, from where I came from at Arrow, and the reason Arrow was so successful is because it had such a good team there under James White, ensuring that everything was absolutely as good as it could be and done properly. So, that's kind of how I learned how to do things. So I would do it in the same way. Any 4K release I would make sure it's a very good restoration. I would make sure that it's done in HDR. I think doing a 4K release in SDR is probably not the right thing to do. So I wouldn't be looking at that. And the thing is with 4K is that just a lot of these films, it's just not realistic from an economical point of view, from a materials point of view, for that to happen. But should the right film and the right restoration come along, I'll absolutely look at a 4K. There is 1 or 2 titles on my list that I'm looking at that could potentially be 4K releases in the future. So if that happens, then I'll absolutely be looking at it.
Excellent. That sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time. I want to encourage everybody that's watching this or listening to it, however you're checking this out, to support Radiance Films. You can go to the website, you can pre-order these titles, and we just heard how this is, you're not buying a boat with the pre-order money. this is going directly into future projects. And that's how it works. this stuff lives and dies. It grows on the support of the customers themselves. So we're going to be there for it. Thank you so much for talking to me about this. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Heath. Appreciate it.
All right, there you have it. It's a really interesting time, right? Because we are talking about a brand new label that I can already tell is going to do absolutely great things. The connections are there. The passion is there. The experience is there. Fran knows what he's doing. He is a pro, and he's picking movies that he loves. He's doing them the right way. I love what he said about the special features and the honesty about commentaries, where he said essentially that, commentaries are important, but he doesn't have time to listen to a lot of commentaries. And I say this as someone who has just, it's official now. I can say I have recorded an audio commentary. There's an upcoming Mill Creek box set of thrillers from the vault it's Columbia Pictures. It's 8 Columbia Pictures. There's also a companion sci-fi from the vault coming from Mill Creek Entertainment. But I, along with C. Courtney Joyner, recorded a commentary for The Man They Could Not Hang. So that's the Serial at Midnight audio commentary debut. But of course, if you've been following this channel for a long time, you know that there are audio commentaries right here on the channel. I did an audio commentary with Eric Wilkinson from MVD Entertainment for Die Hard, which was his favorite movie. It is his favorite movie. I've done them. They Live. That's a good Halloween one if you're still listening to this before the Halloween season. And if you saw my conversation with Jeff from Films at Home, or heard my conversation with Jeff from Films at Home for episode 2, my They Live commentary, I'm tremendously proud of that, with Joshua Jeb Kuga, the writer of Bubba Hotep and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers, and working now for AEW, which is an amazing, it's just, I'm so lucky to know that guy. He's taught me a lot about how to interview people. He's paid his dues for a long time. And the knowledge that he's shared with me and kind of taught with me, kind of mentored me in some of the, I'm going to tell you guys, interviews did not come naturally to me. I needed a little help trying to figure out where to start with some of this stuff. And he was a great resource. So if you're a comic fan, you guys got to check out Bubba Hotep and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers. Of course, it's the Don Coscarelli. That movie is what we're talking about, based on a Joe R. Lansdale story. And then Bubba Hotep and the Cosmic Bloodsuckers is another Joe Lansdale story that's been adapted for comics. And it's really great. I love that story. But my point through all of that is that commentaries are not necessarily... they take a lot of time to listen to. They take just as much time to listen to a commentary as it takes to watch the movie. So with so much coming out, I appreciate what he had to say about trying to focus on other areas of special features. So we will be, what does the Emperor say at the end, or Palpatine, Senator Palpatine, is it at the end of The Phantom Menace? I shall be watching your career with great interest. Or whatever he says. That's not a direct quote. It's something like that. Oh, I believe this power station will be fully operational by the time your friends arrive. And we're having fun quoting Star Wars. All right. So, guys, I think we're going to send this one out to pasture for this episode. Thank you so much. As always, continue to rate, review, and subscribe. Those are the biggest ways that you can support Serial at Midnight. If you want to go above and beyond and take things to the next level, the ultimate level of support for Serial at Midnight, we do have a Patreon. There are lots of Patreon supporters, and I hope that I'm serving them well. We have got tons and tons of Patreon exclusives, over 130 exclusive videos that include collection tours. There's some audio commentaries that are still only for Patreon. And I do the Collecting at Midnight series on Patreon. I'm about to do another one this month. I think it's episode 29. It's basically just me talking about my own collecting habits, struggling with limits of space, struggling with trying to get things out when so much is coming in, you know, on a near daily basis. And then just what I'm buying. What did I buy? You know, I review a lot of stuff, a lot of titles and releases at Serial at Midnight, but what am I buying that I'm maybe not talking about in the main channel videos? It all goes to Patreon. Shopping sales and things like that. So that's all at patreon.com/serialatmidnight. But anything you can do to support this channel is it's mucho appreciated. So if that's just a thumbs up, if that's just leaving a comment saying, hey, I really enjoyed this, it's all appreciated. I'm glad that you're here. And Serial at Midnight continues to grow and go to some really exciting places. What does the future hold? Wonderful things. Thanks for being with us for it. Guys, until next time, I am Heath Holland. This is Serial at Midnight, and I will catch you